Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the EDS Liberty and watched the stars through the massive viewing window. He had been a ship commander for 12 years, but today felt different. Today, humanity would meet aliens for the first time. The thought made his hands shake slightly as he gripped the railing. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the breathing of his crew. Behind him, Admiral Lisa Parker checked her watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. She was a tough woman who had fought in 3 different wars on Earth. But Jake could see worry in her eyes. President Carl Hughes stood next to her, wearing his best suit and trying to look calm. The leader of Earth looked small next to the military officers in their uniforms. Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved between computer screens, reading data that Jake did not understand. She was the smartest person Jake had ever met, and if she looked worried, then everyone should be worried. Her fingers moved quickly over her tablet as she checked the alien ship positions for the 100th time. Dr. Henry Bell sat in the corner, reading through files about alien contact procedures. He was Earth's best expert on alien psychology, even though he had never actually met an alien. His job was to help them understand what the aliens wanted and how they thought. He looked up from his papers and shook his head slowly. The alien fleet had appeared 3 days ago at the edge of the solar system. 50 massive ships that made Earth's biggest warships look like toys. They had not attacked, but they had not answered any communication attempts either. They just waited. The waiting was the worst part. Jake remembered the moment when the alien ships first appeared on the sensors. The officer on duty had stared at the screen for a full minute before reporting to command. Nobody had believed it at first. After decades of searching for alien life, the aliens had found humanity instead. The governments of Earth had worked together faster than ever before. Every country put aside their differences and united under one command. The United Nations had become the voice of all humanity in just 3 days. It was amazing what the threat of alien invasion could do to bring people together. Admiral Parker walked over to Jake and spoke quietly. "Commander, are you ready for this?" She had chosen him to represent Earth's military during the first contact because he was calm under pressure. Jake hoped she was right about that. "As ready as anyone can be for something that has never happened before," Jake replied. He tried to smile, but it felt forced. "Do we know what they want yet?" "Dr. Bell thinks they want to talk, not fight," Admiral Parker said. "Their ships are in formation, but they have not powered up weapons. That is a good sign." President Hughes joined their conversation. "The question is what they want to talk about. Dr. Rodriguez says their technology is centuries ahead of ours. They could destroy our planet without much effort." Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her computers. "The energy readings from their smallest ship are higher than our biggest nuclear reactor. We are not dealing with equals here. These aliens are so far beyond us that we might as well be throwing rocks at them." The communication system suddenly came to life with a loud beep. Everyone on the bridge turned toward the main screen. A message was coming through from the alien fleet. Jake felt his heart speed up as he realized this was the moment that would change everything for humanity. The screen flickered and then showed something that made Jake step backward. The alien was tall, maybe 8 feet, and seemed to be made of some kind of crystal. Light moved through its body in patterns that hurt to look at directly. It had no face that Jake could recognize, but somehow he knew it was looking at them. When the alien spoke, its voice was like music mixed with the sound of breaking glass. The words came through the translation system that Dr. Rodriguez had set up. "Greetings, humans of Earth. I am Kethvar of the Zephyrian Empire." Jake looked at the others on the bridge. They all had the same expression of amazement and fear. First contact was really happening. After all the movies and books about meeting aliens, the real thing felt stranger than any fiction. "You have achieved interstellar travel capability," the alien continued. "This means you now fall under the authority of the Zephyrian Empire. We have ruled this galaxy for over 3,000 of your years. Every species that reaches the stars must follow our laws." President Hughes stepped forward, even though his face had gone pale. "What laws are those?" The alien tilted its head in a way that reminded Jake of a bird studying a worm. "The law of tribute. Every species must give 40% of their resources to the Empire. 40% of your technology, your materials, and your people. In return, the Empire protects you from other threats and allows you to exist." Dr. Bell made a choking sound and dropped his papers. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. They were not talking to explorers or diplomats. They were talking to galactic tax collectors who wanted to steal almost half of everything humanity had. 40% of our people? Admiral Parker asked in a voice that could have cut steel. Yes. Your best and brightest will serve the Empire in various capacities. Your scientists will work on Imperial projects. Your soldiers will join Imperial forces. Your leaders will be replaced by those who better understand Imperial needs. The bridge was completely silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The alien was describing slavery but calling it protection. They wanted to take nearly half of everything humanity had worked to build. What if we refuse? President Hughes asked quietly. The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. Refusal results in orbital bombardment followed by complete extinction of your species. This is not a negotiation, human leader. This is notification of reality. You have 72 standard hours to prepare your tribute and select which of your people will be transferred to Imperial service. Jake watched as the alien's image began to fade. We have done this 847 times before with 847 different species. The result is always the same. Compliance leads to continued existence under Imperial protection. Resistance leads to extinction. Choose wisely. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Jake looked around at the faces of Earth's leaders and saw the same mixture of shock and growing anger that he felt in his own chest. The aliens had not come to make friends or share knowledge. They had come to make humanity into slaves. Admiral Parker was the first to speak. 72 hours to decide if we want to be slaves or corpses. President Hughes nodded slowly. Then we better make those 72 hours count. The emergency meeting room beneath the United Nations building in Geneva had never seen anything like this. Representatives from every country on Earth sat around the giant circular table that had been built for exactly this kind of crisis. The room was designed to hold the leaders of humanity when the fate of the world hung in the balance. Nobody had imagined it would be used so soon after its construction. General Robert Kane slammed his fist on the table so hard that several people jumped. His face was red with anger and his voice shook when he spoke. We cannot just roll over like beaten dogs. Humanity did not crawl out of caves and build rockets just to become slaves to crystal aliens. Ambassador Claire Foster shook her head and pulled up charts on her tablet. She was known for staying calm in difficult situations, but her hands trembled as she spoke. General, you have seen the numbers. Their smallest ship has more weapons than all of our nuclear missiles combined. This is not about pride or honor. This is about keeping our species alive. Dr. Bell stood up and activated the large screen at the front of the room. Images of alien worlds appeared, showing cities and landscapes that looked nothing like Earth. I have spent the last 3 days studying every piece of information we could gather about the Zephyrian Empire. What I found should terrify all of us. The room grew quiet as Dr. Bell clicked through his presentation. 17 different species have faced this same choice before us. Every single one of them is either extinct or completely absorbed into the Empire. The Altarians tried to negotiate for better terms. Their planet is now a mining operation run by robots. The Proxima Collective attempted military resistance. Their entire star system is an asteroid field. Captain Steve Warren, the best pilot in Earth's Space Force, stood up slowly. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke at meetings, but when he did, people listened. Doctor, what you are telling us is that we are the first species stupid enough to actually think about saying no to these aliens. Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly from her position near the computers. That is exactly what makes this situation unique. Every other species was smart enough to surrender immediately when they saw the size of the Zephyrian fleet. We are apparently the first species dumb enough to consider fighting back. President Hughes looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. Some looked scared, others angry, and a few seemed resigned to whatever fate awaited them. Maybe stupid is not the right word. Maybe the word is human. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Earth's history. Military officers presented attack plans that everyone knew would fail. Diplomats suggested negotiation strategies that had already been tried by extinct species. Scientists calculated the exact odds of human survival under various scenarios, and none of them were good. General Kane pulled up tactical displays showing Earth's defenses. We have 200 warships, 500 fighter craft, and enough nuclear weapons to destroy our own planet 10 times over. Against their 50 ships, we might last 6 hours if we are very lucky. Ambassador Foster countered with diplomatic options. We could try to buy time, maybe offer to pay tribute gradually instead of all at once. Some species might have survived by being more useful to the Empire than others. Dr. Rodriguez shook her head at both suggestions. The aliens have been doing this for 3,000 years. They have seen every trick, every strategy, and every desperate attempt to avoid paying tribute. There is no clever solution that nobody has thought of before. The hours passed slowly as the debate continued. Outside the meeting room, billions of people waited for their leaders to decide their fate. Television screens around the world showed the alien ships hanging in space like dark clouds promising a storm. Captain Warren shared his thoughts on the alien psychology. They expect us to surrender because everyone always surrenders. They are probably not even preparing for a fight because why would they? We are just the next species in line to pay tribute. That might be the only advantage we have, General Kane said thoughtfully. They are not expecting resistance because they have never faced real resistance before. Dr. Bell showed more images of conquered species. Look at what happened to these civilizations. The Empire does not just take tribute and leave you alone. They slowly absorb everything that makes you unique. Your culture, your technology, your way of thinking. Within a few generations, you become just another part of the Empire. Ambassador Foster argued for survival at any cost. Better to be alive and serving the Empire than dead and free. We can preserve some part of humanity even under alien rule. What part? President Hughes asked quietly. If we give them 40% of our people, 40% of our resources and accept their authority over everything we do, what part of humanity is left to preserve? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room understood what the president was really asking. Was it better to die as humans or live as something else? General Kane spoke for many in the room when he said, "My grandfather fought in World War II. He used to tell me that some things are worth dying for. Freedom was one of them. I cannot look at his picture on my wall and tell him that his grandson chose slavery over death." As the hours passed, something began to change in the room. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. Anger, determination, and a growing sense that surrender was not really an option after all. Dr. Rodriguez made the final calculation that changed everything. Even if we surrender completely, our survival is not guaranteed. The Empire has destroyed species that served them faithfully for centuries. They do it when those species are no longer useful, or when they become inconvenient. With 12 hours left before the deadline, President Hughes called for a preliminary vote. It was not legally binding, but it would show which way the room was leaning. The result surprised everyone, including the president himself. Out of 195 representatives, 147 voted to refuse the tribute demand. When President Hughes announced the result, the room erupted in shouting from both sides. Those who supported surrender were horrified, while those who supported resistance were energized. Ambassador Foster stood up and asked for quiet. "We are about to make a decision that will either save humanity or destroy it completely. I pray to God that we are choosing correctly." President Hughes looked at the voting results one more time. "The preliminary vote is clear, but we have 12 hours to change our minds. Anyone who wants to speak should do so now." But as the final hours passed, the vote only became more decisive. By the time the deadline approached, humanity had made its choice. The Zephyrian fleet waited in the cold darkness of space with the patience that came from absolute certainty. Kethvar stood in the command center of his flagship and reviewed the data from his previous 847 successful tribute collections. Every species had eventually surrendered, though some took longer than others to accept reality. The crystal being's thoughts moved through patterns of light that flickered across his translucent body. Humans were an interesting species, he admitted to himself. Their technology was primitive, but they had achieved faster than light travel, faster than most races. Still, that meant nothing when faced with the overwhelming power of the Empire. On the bridge of the EDS Liberty, Jake Morrison checked his uniform one final time. The next few minutes would determine whether humanity lived or died, and he wanted to look professional when delivering their answer. Admiral Parker stood beside him, her jaw set in a hard line. President Hughes practiced his words silently, knowing that billions of people across Earth were watching and waiting. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the alien fleet's positions, while Dr. Bell reviewed his notes on Zephyrian psychology. Everything they had learned suggested that the aliens expected immediate surrender. No species had ever taken the full 72 hours to decide. because the choice was obvious to any rational civilization. The communication system activated exactly on schedule. Kethvar's towering crystal form materialized in the center of the bridge. His light patterns shifting in what humans had learned indicated confidence and authority. Jake felt his mouth go dry as he looked at the alien who held the power to destroy his entire species. Humans of Earth. Kethvar spoke in his musical voice that sounded like wind chimes made of broken glass. Your compliance deadline has arrived. State your terms of tribute and submission to the Zephyrian Empire. President Hughes stepped forward into the holographic alien's view. Behind him, representatives from every nation on Earth appeared as smaller holograms, showing that all of humanity stood together in this moment. Children in schools, workers in factories, soldiers in bunkers, and families in their homes all watched the same broadcast. The president had practiced this speech dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, all those carefully chosen words seemed unnecessary. The decision was simple, even if the consequences were terrible. He looked directly into Kethvar's crystalline eyes and spoke clearly. No. The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. On the alien flagship, monitoring officers stopped their work and stared at their instruments in confusion. Automated systems flagged the response as a data error because it made no logical sense. Across the galaxy, other species who monitored Imperial communications heard the word and felt something they had not experienced in centuries. Kethvar's crystal body flickered, with rapid light patterns that Dr. Bell recognized as extreme surprise mixed with confusion. The alien had expected negotiation, pleading, or immediate surrender. He had not expected a simple, direct refusal. Clarification required, Kethvar said after a long pause. Your response suggests refusal of tribute demand. This interpretation cannot be correct. Admiral Parker moved to stand beside President Hughes. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in battle. Your interpretation is entirely correct. The answer is no. We will not pay tribute. We will not submit to your authority. We will not surrender our freedom. Jake Morrison joined them, representing Earth's military forces. We understand the consequences of this decision. We have studied your history with other species. We know what you do to races that refuse to comply. President Hughes felt strength flowing through him as he spoke for his entire species. But here is what you do not understand about humans. We would rather die free than live as slaves. We would rather fight against impossible odds than kneel to tyrants. Our answer is no, and it will always be no. The alien's light patterns shifted to colors that hurt to look at directly. Dr. Bell recognized the display as intense anger mixed with disbelief. Kethvar had never encountered a species that chose extinction over submission, and his entire worldview was struggling to process what he was hearing. Your species chooses extinction, Kethvar said, his musical voice now carrying harsh undertones. Orbital bombardment begins in 6 hours. Your cities will be reduced to ash. Your civilization will be erased from existence. This conversation is concluded. President Hughes raised his hand before the alien could disconnect. Wait, you have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years by making other species afraid. But you made one mistake. You assumed that every species values survival above everything else. The alien paused, his form flickering with what might have been curiosity. Humans value freedom more than life, the president continued. We have fought wars against our own species for the right to be free. We have died in millions rather than accept tyranny. You offer us slavery disguised as protection, but we choose death disguised as defeat. Admiral Parker added her voice to the declaration. Every human child learns about heroes who died rather than surrender. Every human knows the stories of people who fought against overwhelming odds because fighting was better than giving up. You picked the wrong species to threaten. Jake Morrison felt a strange calm settle over him as he spoke his final words to the alien conqueror. You have destroyed 847 species, but you have never faced humans before. We are about to show you what happens when you threaten people who refuse to be afraid. Kethvar's image began to fade, but his final words carried clearly across the communication channel. Foolish humans, your defiance will be remembered only by the stars, because there will be no one left alive to tell your story. As the alien disappeared, the bridge fell silent. Jake looked around at his companions and saw the same mixture of terror and pride that he felt in his own heart. They had just signed humanity's death warrant, but they had done it with dignity. What none of them knew was that their conversation had been monitored by communication networks across the galaxy. The word "no" was spreading through systems that the Empire thought it controlled completely. Species that had served the Zephyrians for millennia were hearing something they had forgotten existed. On distant worlds, in hidden bases, and in the depths of space, resistance movements that had been waiting for centuries suddenly found their moment. Humanity's refusal to surrender had become a signal that lit up the galaxy like a beacon. The age of tribute was about to end, and it would end with the same word that had started the revolution: no. The Zephyrian bombardment was scheduled to begin in exactly 6 hours, but something was wrong with the galaxy. Kethvar stood in his command center watching sensor readings that made no sense. Energy signatures were appearing throughout the solar system, but they were not coming from Earth's primitive fleet. Captain Alex Brooks piloted his fighter craft EDS Defiance through the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter when his sensors went crazy. Massive ships were dropping out of hyperspace all around him, but they were not Zephyrian vessels. These ships had markings he had never seen before, and they were moving to intercept the alien bombardment fleet. On Earth, Admiral Parker stared at her tactical display in complete confusion. "Dr. Rodriguez, are you seeing this? I count over 300 unknown vessels approaching from multiple directions." Dr. Rodriguez's fingers flew over her computer controls as she tried to identify the new arrivals. "These energy signatures do not match any known technology. Some of these ships are using power sources that should not exist according to our physics." The first communication came from a vessel that looked like it was built from flowing water held together by force fields. The voice that spoke was translated into English by systems that humanity did not recognize. "This is Captain Zara 9 of the Altarian Liberation Front. We are the species your history books say are extinct." Dr. Bell dropped his coffee cup and stared at the main screen. "That is impossible. The Altarians were destroyed centuries ago. We have the Zephyrian records." "The Zephyrian records lie," Captain Zara 9 replied. "We survived by hiding in the spaces between star systems. We have been waiting for someone to say the word that you just spoke to the Empire." More voices joined the communication channel. Ships that looked like they were grown instead of built announced themselves as the Proxima Collective. Vessels made of what appeared to be crystallized, music identified as the Kepler Union. Species that humanity had never heard of declared their allegiance to something they called the Liberation Alliance. Jake Morrison felt like he was dreaming as he listened to dozens of alien voices speaking in languages that were instantly translated. "Admiral, how many resistance movements are out there?" Captain Zara 9 answered his question. "Every species the Empire claims to have destroyed still exists somewhere. Every species that pays tribute has hidden resistance cells. For 3,000 years, we have been waiting for someone to prove that saying no to the Zephyrians was possible. The battle began when the Zephyrian fleet moved toward Earth and found their path blocked by ships they thought were myths. Kethvar's forces had trained to fight primitive civilizations, not coordinated fleets of species that had spent centuries perfecting guerrilla warfare." Lieutenant Commander Kate Morgan watched from Luna Base as the space around Earth became a light show of energy weapons and exploding ships. Human vessels joined the battle alongside aliens who had been fighting the Empire since before humanity discovered fire. "This is incredible," General Kane reported from his command bunker deep underground. "Our weapons are barely scratching their shields, but it does not matter. Every time a human ship refuses to retreat, it inspires 10 alien vessels to fight harder." The Zephyrian advantage in technology meant nothing when they were outnumbered 50-1 by enemies who had nothing left to lose. Kethvar found himself fighting a battle he had never trained for against opponents who were supposed to be dead or enslaved. Captain Steve Warren led a squadron of human fighters against a Zephyrian cruiser that could have destroyed his entire wing with one shot. Instead of trying to win, he focused on not giving up. When his weapons failed, he rammed his fighter into the alien ship's weapon array. The explosion barely damaged the cruiser, but it sent a message across the battlefield that humans would never surrender. Dr. Bell monitored communications from around the galaxy and watched in amazement as the rebellion spread in real time. "President Hughes, you need to see this. Every species that heard our refusal is rising up simultaneously. The Empire is facing revolts on thousands of worlds. The Zephyrian command structure began to collapse as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that had paid tribute faithfully for centuries were attacking imperial installations. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were declaring independence. The Empire's military was spread too thin to respond to universal rebellion. Captain Alex Brooks found himself fighting alongside an alien pilot whose species communicated through color changes on their ship's hull. They could not speak to each other, but they understood the universal language of resistance. When the alien ship was damaged, Alex moved to cover its retreat. When Alex's weapons overheated, the alien returned the favor. Admiral Parker coordinated Earth's defenses while watching something that military strategists had said was impossible. The Zephyrians built their entire empire on fear and the assumption that resistance was futile. When that assumption proved false, their tactics became useless. The turning point came when Kethvar received a message from the Zephyrian homeworld. All tribute fleets are under attack. Colonial worlds are declaring independence. The Outer Rim has fallen to rebel forces. Request immediate withdrawal to defend core systems. General Kane watched the alien fleet begin to retreat and felt something he had not expected. They are running. The most powerful military force in the galaxy is running from a bunch of rebels who were supposed to be extinct. The space battle ended not with a final explosion, but with the simple sight of Zephyrian ships jumping to hyperspace and disappearing into the distance. The most feared fleet in the galaxy had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by the idea that defeat was preferable to slavery. Captain Zara 9's voice came across all communication channels as the last enemy ship vanished. The tribute system is broken. For the first time in 3,000 years, species across the galaxy are free to choose their own destiny. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and looked out at the fleet of alien vessels that had come to fight alongside humanity. Captain Zara 9, why did you risk everything to help a species you had never met? The alien's reply would be remembered in history books for generations. Because you said the word that we had forgotten how to say. You reminded the galaxy that some things are worth dying for. Freedom is one of them. The war was over, but Jake realized that the real work was just beginning. The galaxy was free for the first time in millennia, and someone had to help build whatever came next. 6 months after humanity said no to the Zephyrian Empire, Ambassador Claire Foster stood in the observation deck of Freedom Station, the new space platform built in Earth's orbit. Through the massive windows, she could see ships from hundreds of different species coming and going in peaceful cooperation. The sight still amazed her every day. The station itself was a marvel of combined technology. Altarian water flow engineering, mixed with human steel construction and Proxima energy systems. Species that had hidden from each other for centuries were now working together to build something the galaxy had never seen before. A government based on choice instead of fear. Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral, walked through the corridors of the station and marveled at how quickly everything had changed. Alien children played games with human kids while their parents attended meetings about trade agreements and defense treaties. The universal translator systems had improved so much that most species could communicate as easily, as if they spoke the same language. Admiral Morrison called Captain Zara 9 as she approached him in the main corridor. The Altarian had become one of humanity's closest allies, and Jake still found it strange to think that 6 months ago he had never heard of her species. The council meeting is about to begin. The Galactic Liberation Council met in a chamber designed to accommodate the physical needs of over 50 different species. Some breathed different gases, others required specific temperatures, and a few existed as energy patterns rather than solid matter. The engineering required to make the room work was incredible, but it was nothing compared to the political engineering required to make the council itself work. President Hughes took his place at the speaking podium, still finding it hard to believe that he was addressing representatives from across the galaxy. 6 months ago, humanity faced a choice between freedom and survival. Today, we gather to prove that we made the right choice. Dr. Rodriguez had been promoted to head the new technology sharing initiative, and her reports always amazed the council members. When species share knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for tribute payments, everyone advances faster. In 6 months, we have made more scientific progress than the Empire made in 6 decades. The Zephyrian Empire still existed, but it was a shadow of its former power. Most of their territory had declared independence, and their military was scattered across the galaxy trying to maintain control of their remaining worlds. Several diplomatic missions had come from the Zephyrian homeworld asking for negotiation. But every species gave them the same answer that had started the revolution. General Kane, now serving as Earth's Minister of Defense, often laughed about the irony of their situation. We were the most primitive species in the galaxy, but we taught everyone else how to be free. Sometimes the best weapon is not the most advanced one. Dr. Bell had become the galaxy's leading expert on what he called the psychology of liberation. His research showed that the Zephyrian system had worked for so long because it convinced species that resistance was impossible. Once someone proved that resistance was possible, the entire system collapsed like a house made of cards. The economic changes were as dramatic as the political ones. Trade between species had increased by thousands of % once the tribute system ended. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources were being rebuilt with help from species that had hidden advanced technology for centuries. Captain Steve Warren, now commanding the Joint Defense Fleet, coordinated patrols with alien species who had been fighting guerrilla wars since before Earth had developed agriculture. The amazing thing is how much these species accomplished while living in hiding. They developed technology we cannot even understand. The biggest challenge was not military or economic, but philosophical. Species that had lived under imperial rule for thousands of years had to relearn how to make decisions for themselves. Ambassador Foster spent most of her time helping newly independent worlds figure out how to govern themselves without orders from above. Freedom is harder than slavery, she explained to a group of newly liberated species leaders. Slaves only have to follow orders. Free people have to make choices, and choices have consequences. The Altarian Captain Zara 9 had become something like a galactic historian, documenting the stories of resistance movements that had operated in secret for millennia. Every species has heroes who refuse to give up hope. Your word no gave those heroes permission to act. Dr. Rodriguez's technology reports showed that the galaxy was advancing faster than ever before. The Empire stifled innovation because new ideas might threaten their control. Now that species are free to experiment and share knowledge, we are seeing breakthroughs every day. The military situation remained tense but stable. The Zephyrian Empire controlled perhaps 10% of their former territory, and their attempts to retake lost worlds had failed repeatedly. General Kane's forces worked with alien resistance fighters to make sure that freedom, once gained, would not be lost again. President Hughes reflected on the changes during his evening walks through Freedom Station. Human families lived next to alien families, and their children played together without thinking about species differences. This is what we fought for, he told Jake during one of their regular meetings. Not just the right to say no, but the right to say yes to something better. The most remarkable change was cultural. Species that had spent centuries hiding their true nature were rediscovering their own traditions and sharing them with others. Art, music, literature, and philosophy from hundreds of worlds created a renaissance that touched every corner of the galaxy. Jake Morrison often returned to the bridge of the EDS Liberty, now converted into a museum ship. He would stand in the same spot where humanity had delivered their historic refusal and think about how one word had changed everything. Visitors from across the galaxy came to see the ship where the liberation began. They stood in the same room where President Hughes had spoken the word that freed the galaxy, and many of them wept with joy at the memory of that moment. The galaxy was different now. More chaotic, certainly more dangerous, and definitely less predictable than it had been under Imperial rule, but it was also more alive than it had been in 3,000 years. Species were free to dream, to explore, to create, and to choose their own destiny. Ambassador Foster often ended her speeches to new council members with the same reminder. We must never forget that all of this started with one word. When someone asks you to surrender your freedom, remember that you always have a choice. You can always say no. The word that had terrified the galaxy for 3,000 years was fear. The word that liberated the galaxy was simpler and more powerful. No. And because humanity had the courage to say it, the galaxy would never be the same.